All right. Today we're talking with Navy veteran Mark McLaughlin and Arch Watkins, both EA6 NFOs. Now, from what I understand, Mark, normally you and Arch are doing these interviews together, but Arch isn't able to make it today. So it's all you on the spot. And do want to give you congratulations for being episode number 400.
Thank
It's
you.
been a phenomenal journey over like 7+ years. So congratulations, you're number 400. I wish I had a prize for you, but I wasn't really thinking ahead. So I think it's something maybe I'll hit you up later. So anyways, you had a great career in the Navy, did some phenomenal things when you got out, had a lot of really great jobs, and eventually gave it all up for entrepreneurship. So take us, before we get to talk about that, take us back and tell us about your time in the Navy.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me on. I'm sorry, Arch apologizes for not being able to be here, but we really appreciate this, and and honored to be number 400. So yeah, the Navy. So to your opening, both Arch and I were Navy naval flight officers, flying EA-6B Prowlers. For those listeners who aren't familiar, it's kind of a blunt nose carrier-based jet that the Navy and Marine Corps used to fly, and focusing on electronic attack. That was a wonderful experience. Honestly, it's professionally, hands down, the best thing I have ever done or will ever do is being in the military. And it's really forged, I think, who Arch and I are as people in many, many ways. So I was in from 2001 until I left active duty in 2010, after fulfilling my aviation commitment, which I know you're familiar with, that being quite a long time from your time flying. And then, went from there. And essentially where I was at the point in 2010 was that, I loved the military. I absolutely loved flying. I loved the people I worked with. It was very fulfilling. But I wasn't quite sure that it was what I wanted to do forever. The way I viewed it for myself, at least, was that, I was, in my early 30s. The iron was hot to kind of take that military experience and transition it into a different direction. And in my mind, if I stayed in for 20 or 25 or 30, I think the opportunities would just change, right? The opportunities, the longer you stay in, I think, are much more in the defense industry, which is wonderful if that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. But the opportunity to redefine yourself, I think, became a little harder the longer I stayed in. So that was kind of the reason I looked at getting out when I did. But the Navy was amazing. Learned many, many life lessons, some the hard way, and some I was lucky enough to have seasoned people help me out before I really hurt myself. But it was an amazing experience, and I loved it.
Yeah. So you seem like the kind of guy that had a plan as far as getting out. What did you end up doing when you first got out, and because you had quite a good civilian career before you gave it all up for this entrepreneurial gig. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So my plan, when I decided I wanted to get out of the service, I looked at post 9/11 GI Bill had just become available. And I said, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to apply to some grad schools that are just out of reach. Given my undergraduate performance, they should have laughed at me. So I applied to Harvard, Wharton, and then University of Virginia's Darden Business School. And I thought, hey, if one of these groups is dumb enough to say yes, then hey, that'll help me make my decision. I'll pull the trigger and I'll go. And UVA, they gave me a chance, and so I, my wife and I said, hey, let's go do it. So I used the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to business school to get my MBA, and that was a whole experience in and of itself, which I'll come back to in a moment. But I ended up in the finance realm. Finance drew me in. Part of it was, frankly, that of all the career paths out of business school, the investment banking route was kind of I viewed that as kind of the most grueling, the most intense, the most kind of satisfied, that kind of drive to prove myself that so many U.S. military guys have. Whether that was the right reason or wrong reason to do that job, I don't know. But anyway, I went into investment banking, and it was about 2 years of banking. I knew immediately from day one, once I started at the bank, that it really wasn't going to be a long-term fit for me, for reasons that are probably, we could do a whole separate podcast about. I learned a ton though. In investment banking, it's a lot different than a lot of people, than a lot of listeners might expect. It's not like, buying and selling stocks or bonds. That's more trading, if you will. What I did, what most bankers do, is more, financing companies. Hey, company needs to raise X number of millions of dollars to invest in a new plant or to hire new people or to acquire another company. How do we help them structure the deal where they can get the capital they need to grow? And also we did a lot of sell side. So people want to sell their business. We try to find the buyer and basically work the deal to their maximum benefit. Mm-hmm. So it was a completely different world than I knew. And this will be kind of a theme, I think, at least in my story, is one thing the military taught me well, and that I've applied in the civilian world is, you can always redefine yourself. I showed up at day one in flight school in Pensacola in 2001. I knew zero about aviation. And through, hard work, diligence, and putting myself out there, like so many of us do, eventually I became very good at it. And then, when I went to business school, I honestly did not know, and I'm not lying. If I asked a buddy of mine in class one day, I said, hey, when they talk about revenue, is that the money that comes in the company, or is that what's left at the end? I honestly knew shockingly little. And I was very self-conscious about that. I didn't know any of these terms, but I'd already redefined myself once, and I had the military had taught me that if I can do it once, I can do it again. And that's what I've done a couple of times since then. Same thing with the whiskey world. I didn't know a thing about whiskey except I liked it. But it just had that drive and willingness to take a risk that I think a lot of us military guys have, because we've had to do it, in our military careers.
Yeah. And so how many years had you been out of the Navy before you jumped ship into the world of entrepreneurship?
I quit my banking job to start the distillery in 2014. So about 4 years in between.
So you may not have been doing what you loved when you got out of the Navy, but you're pretty successful there. What triggered this entrepreneurial itch? Have you always been an entrepreneur, or did something come out of nowhere?
For me, I always knew I wanted to. Well, I always had a suspicion that I would end up owning my own business. When I was younger, as a kid, my uncle owned a restaurant. I always thought that'd be cool, until he wisely told me how hard of a life that is. Not that I'm afraid of a difficult challenge, but that restaurant business, God bless anybody who can do that. That's a tough nut to crack, and those who do earn it. Always had the inkling. When I left to go into business school, none of the big career paths really drew me in. I told you I kind of went to finance for a few reasons, but I really wasn't all that excited about it. I just kind of said, hey, this is the best option that I see available after business school. But defining my own path and having my own business was always kind of in the back of my mind. When I was in the Navy, I thought about starting a brewery. And a few years later, when I was actually looking to start a distillery, the reason I had shifted from beer to spirits primarily was just that there was, at the time, it was a much bigger opportunity. I think the brewery thing had kind of already crested, and the distillery thing, the whiskey thing, was just starting to become a big trend. But so I had that kind of inkling for a while, and then really one of the blessings in disguise was how much I disliked my banking job. Frankly, I think the money was great. I mean, I was making plenty of money. So if I liked that job better, I probably would have just sucked it up and kept doing it. Hey, this is okay, but the money's good. But I was just very deeply dissatisfied with it. That's not to say there weren't great people. It's not to say it's a bad job. It just wasn't a good fit for me. And because I was so unhappy, it just made the decision to pull the trigger that much easier. But as far as, really, I mean, it boiled down to 2 years of dissatisfaction was enough for me to know I don't want to do this for 20 more. It's just not for me. So just quit the job without much more of a plan than I like whiskey. There's an opportunity. I hope that I'm capable enough to pull it off. And then that was it. I didn't stop and make a business plan. I didn't have time. I was working 80, 90 hours a week at the bank. Maybe not always 90, but say 70 to 80 would be closer to typical. And then 90 if a deal was closing or something. Just crazy hours. Basically work, sleep, maybe see my kids a little bit. There was no time to transition a plan from banking into this. It was just, do it or don't. And so I just said, all right, I'll do it.
So where'd the true idea for Old Line Spirits come from? Just a love of whiskey, and I think that's what I'm going to do. And what were some of the first steps in research and everything and getting started?
Yeah, so the impetus was essentially a love of whiskey. I love beer, wine, whiskey. All those things are things that I think it's a fun industry. I like to consume all of those things, and each of them has their own appeal. Whiskey, in particular, for me, has an extra special appeal because of just the time frame that it takes to make a good whiskey, and there's kind of a romantic aspect of, okay, you put your blood, sweat, and tears into this product, put it in a barrel, and then wait years and years until you finally get this product that hopefully is very, very good. So that kind of romantic aspect drew me in. But really what, from the dollars and cents perspective is, it was very easy or very clear to me that what was happening in the beer world was going to happen in whiskey next, and was starting to. So it just seemed like, while still very challenging, that at least the tide was moving in the right direction for me to jump in and take a risk. But like I said before, I didn't really have a plan when I quit. I just didn't really have the luxury of time to do that. I had to kind of make a decision and just, cut one cord and reach for the next rope. But I had a very, very, very chance encounter with a gentleman at a distilling conference. I quit my job in March 2014. And I actually was in Seattle 4 days later for a wedding, and there happened to be a distilling conference in Seattle. And I decided, hey, well, I want to start a whiskey distillery. I should probably go to this conference and shake hands and say hi to people and figure out what step one is going to be, right? Because I don't know anything.
Yeah, perfect.
And and I was sitting on a couch, frankly, feeling sorry for myself, because this is like day 2 of this conference, and day 1 hammered home to me how stupid I was to kind of quit my job without a plan. And I'm like, oh man, like I knew nothing, but I know nothing. And a gentleman,
okay, first thing you would do
next to me.
First things first, don't quit your job. Sorry, already did that.
Yeah. That's right. Already done.
Too late.
Tell your wife first. That's I'll say that. I did that. That was the move that I made. But a gentleman sat down next to me on the couch at this conference. It turns out he lived about 90 minutes north of Seattle in a place called Samish Island, Washington. And he owned a tiny distillery, and he was looking to sell it. He was a Vietnam vet, Army infantry. His business partner / friend / neighbor was a Navy Vietnam era veteran. And they were just making whiskey literally as a retirement hobby that happened to make them a few dollars on the side. It was as small could be. But we're sitting there chatting, and he asked what I was doing at this conference. And I said, I'm from Baltimore. I'm a former Navy guy trying to start a distillery. This just seemed like the place to go. And he says, well, hey man, I'm trying to sell my place. You want to come check it out? So I said, yes, and it was almost like I was looking for the hidden camera. It just seemed too perfect. But, 4 or 5 weeks later, I flew back out there, and this place was 2,000 square feet, maybe. It was a barn on Bob's property. He was making this really wonderful American single malt whiskey, which is a very new category that Bob was at the forefront of. And he was doing it just on his terms. And I loved it. And he was looking to sell the business because Jim, his business partner, was terminally ill. So this went from being a thing that was a passion project and a fun thing to do with your buddy. But once Jim got sick and he couldn't really be there anymore, he couldn't be around the fumes, the grain, he couldn't help. Now you're a 72-year-old guy doing this on your own. That's not really fun anymore. So for them, they had this amazing kind of small but critical mass of a business that they didn't want to die. They wanted it to continue. They just didn't want to have the energy or the ability to do it themselves. So the timing was just wonderful that, we were eventually invited out there to apprentice, which is what we did. Jim had passed away, but we moved in with Bob, lived in his guest house, and Bob let us, apologies, my phone keeps going off here. Bob let us live in the guest house and live there as long as we wanted. Make whiskey every day from 5 a.m. till 10 p.m. And when we were ready, or at least we thought we were ready, we cut him a check, packed it up in a U-Haul, and moved it across the country back home to Baltimore.
No kidding. Phenomenal story. Well, hey, Mark, hold that thought. We're going to be right back. Take a quick break.
Sure.
All right, back talking with Navy veteran Mark McLaughlin. His business partner, Arch Watkins, is not with us, but they both happen to be EA6B NFOs, and we're talking about Old Line Spirits. So, Mark, before the break, phenomenal story. You're able to intern under the remaining partner of Golden Spirits, is what they had called their distillery. Finished it all up, and you were able to pack it up and move it back home to. You were able to move back home to Baltimore, right? Was it Baltimore? Yep. So what happened after that? Now you guys are definitely on your own. You've taken it all the way across the country, and here you go. Good luck.
Yeah. Let me. Yeah, this is where the story, takes a turn. In now, this is ours, right at that point. With the training wheels are off. Once Bob shook our hands and said, God bless, and then we rolled out of his driveway. And that was 2015 when we left Bob and moved back here. And a couple of things to share, I guess, to people listening who might be contemplating or maybe in process of starting their own business. And I don't mean these things to be discouraging, but I think they're important in that one of the things that Arch and I had done, which I think many listeners on here will have done as well, if they're looking at their own business, is done a very in-depth business plan. I told you before I left the bank, I didn't do that. But once we started the business, or once I quit the bank to do this business, I was very, very heavily involved in financial modeling and just trying to work out every detail of this business to get it started, and then what it would look like over the years. And as I'm sure a lot of people know, is just like no plan survives first contact with the enemy, no business plan survives first contact with reality. It just changes. So, and I expected that. But one piece of advice we got from a potential investor early on, which I, not in front of him, but after, scoffed at him, and it turns out he was dead right, was that it's like he did not invest. Actually, he said, "Hey guys, I think you got a good plan here, but I just think you need more cash than you're trying to raise, and I think that gives me a little concern," and so on and so forth. And hey, he gave us a straight answer, which I respect. And he said, "Some advice to you is whatever you have here on paper, assume that it's going to cost twice as much and take twice as long." And I shook his hand and said, "Thanks for the advice," and walked out. And in the car, Arch and I are like, "No way, man! Like we got this. There's going to be changes, but we've looked at this as deeply as you can look, and there's no way that he's going to be right." Well, it turns out he was exactly right. This whole process took twice as long and cost twice as much money to get going. Mm-hmm. That said, the flip side of that is part of me is glad I didn't know that, because maybe I would have been discouraged. But I think that even knowing that, I think it's the other side of this is, well, there's a will is a way. And, if you really, really do want to start your business, there's ways to get capital. There's ways to be creative and make it come together. So expect that your business plan is never going to go the way you expect it, but expect that you'll be, you'll have the intelligence and the drive to adjust. And just like in the military, you have to. That's just how things get done, right? So, at any rate, we moved to Baltimore, and we had a nightmare finding a location. We were in one location that we were going to, have the business in, and we had signed a temporary lease and invested money in an architect because we were, getting ready to build it out. And there was a massive problem with the plumbing that they hadn't disclosed to us until really too late. Well, that set us back, 6 months or 8 months or a year, about 8 months.
All right, Mark, lost you there for a second, but we're back.
Yeah. So I think where I left off was, all these, nightmares with, the facility and all those sorts of things you just couldn't really predict. And it was a big challenge. And finally it took about 2 years to get open at the distillery here in Baltimore. And, kind of like I mentioned earlier, where one of the things that was a challenge, but also an opportunity, was how much I didn't like my old job. It kind of forced me into something that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. This issue with the facility just being such a headache to get open forced our hand to do something we didn't expect to do. And it ended up being a big positive for us, which was, we always envisioned we'd take Bob's little distillery and move back to Baltimore and grow it. And we always knew we might outsource some production along the way to help supplement our internal production. And what we had to do, because we had no place to make whiskey for 2 years here in Baltimore, was we actually find a partner earlier than we expected and start making whiskey somewhere else. And that's what we did with a place called Middle West Spirits in Columbus, Ohio. Great people, great distillery. And those guys were willing to let us basically make our whiskey with them on their equipment. And that was a big thing for us, because we needed to start making whiskey. We were selling the whiskey that Bob had handed over to us, that came with the distillery. So we were depleting inventory, but we weren't up until we met Middle West, we weren't replenishing it or let alone, adding in more inventory for future growth. So just that alone was big. But what we found out once we went out to Middle West is that, learning how to make whiskey from Bob was amazing. But it was kind of like making a cake with your grandmother. She knows step 1, step 2, step 3. She knows the ingredients. She knows the temperature in the oven, all those things. But, at least my grandmother didn't know the chemistry, right? She didn't need to. And that's kind of Bob. Bob had done the hard work. He had gone through and trial and error. He had made bad whiskey for a couple of years and finally figured out how to make good whiskey through his own blood, sweat, and tears, which is amazing. But Bob didn't really care about the chemistry. He didn't really care about efficiencies. It just wasn't really where he was in life. So the guys in Middle West, they're chemists and engineers, and they helped us, and distillers, obviously, and they helped us deconstruct like what we had and really helped us, understand it. So they were kind of like the master's level course in distilling that we didn't even know we needed it until we went out there. And that just has made a tremendous benefit, has been a tremendous benefit to our business that, I think we got to professionalize ourselves earlier than we really ever would have otherwise, because we were forced to go out there and work with these guys by circumstance. And it ended up being a great thing. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I mean, you could use that as an analogy for so many different kinds of businesses. There's a lot of businesses out there that just figured it out by trial and error. If something didn't work, they just came back and tried it at a different angle. That sounds like what Bob, by trial and error, just figured it out on his own manually the hard way. But when you're going to try to turn it into a really legit business, we have to actually know what's happening here, though. And there's there's a lot of successful small to medium-sized businesses in the U.S. that it totally hinges on the owner's knowledge of everything. And that's in a real, that can be really dangerous to the longevity of the business if everything's still relying on the owner's knowledge or the owner's involvement even. So there's a really cool analogy you used there about how Bob had made his whiskey successful. And are you still making the original whiskey that you learned how to make from Bob?
Yes, with some adjustments. So it's an American single malt whiskey, which for those of you who may not be as familiar, it's a new category. And it's the best way to describe it simply is it's kind of combining the ways of making a single malt Scotch and a bourbon. So we're basically using the grain you would use to make a single malt Scotch, which is 100% malted barley. And we're aging it in the fashion of a bourbon, which is in a first time use virgin American oak barrel. So it's like think of in between a Scotch and a bourbon. It's not smoky. It really does appeal to bourbon drinkers who actually didn't realize that they can actually like a single malt, because single malts, sometimes people think, oh, I don't like Scotch. It's smoky. It's this, that, the other. And it really is. It's a wonderful category. So yes, we are still making that same whiskey that Bob and Jim made with what we think are improvements. Would not be a fair word. I'd say, well, there's certainly improvements in process and efficiency. Absolutely. As far as flavor profile, it's a little different. It just is we took what Bob had and we had certain things about it that we wanted to make a little bit more our own. So without getting too kind of whiskey nerdy, we changed the profile that we mash in the grain. With the mash in is where you put the grain with the hot water and basically break down starch into sugar to get something to ferment. And we do that in a very different temperature profile, which gives us different flavors. So if you were to line up our whiskey and Bob's side by side, you definitely see a very, very close comparison of, hey, these two are definitely sisters. But the flavor profile is slightly different now by design.
Yeah. Okay. So Mark, we're getting close to the end of our time here with Old Line Spirits. Where are you guys at right now? Like give us some numbers. Like how much whiskey have you made? How much have you sold? Where do you see yourselves in another year to 5 years?
Sure. We're still pretty small, although for American single malt, we're actually, believe it or not, one of the bigger ones because it's such a new category. But we've got in our warehouse in Baltimore, it's 25,000 square feet. We've got about 2,000 barrels. So we're investing heavily in growth because you got to put it in the barrel and then you got to wait. And we're making more every week, every year. As far as sales, like this year, 2021, we hope to sell 4,000 cases. And next year, 2022, as we expand into new markets and grow the markets we're in, we expect to be closer to 8,000 actually, which is an aggressive jump, 100% growth. But we do see a pathway to that with new markets and then cultivating the ones we're in. We're still, well, I'd say we might be profitable this year. You know, profitability in the whiskey world takes a while to get to. So we know that. We built our financial plan around that. So from a cash perspective, we're stable, but we certainly, you know, I don't know, we'll be profitable this year or next year, we think, which has been a long time coming.
How many employees are you up to at this point?
Right now, full-time, only five full-time, maybe 8 part-time. And then we're actually part of a ventures portfolio. We have a big investor who's invested in us called Constellation Brands. They own Corona, Negro Modelo, and brands like a bunch of wines and whatnot. So we're part of their ventures portfolio. And what that has allowed us to do is actually team up with some other brands in the portfolio to share salespeople. So our salespeople in New Jersey and Colorado and Massachusetts and New York, for example, are actually I don't count them as employees of ours because we kind of share their time. So if you include them part-time, full-time, we're at like almost 20, I guess. But we're pretty lean in general as far as 5 full-time.
Now, is your distillery, your 2,500 square foot distillery, is it open to the public or is it strictly for making whiskey?
No, it's open. It's at 25,000 actually. It's pretty big.
25,000. Wow.
Yeah, it's open to the public right now. We're open Saturdays and Sundays. Our website is Oldline, OLDLINE, oldlinespirits.com. So you can check out the hours on there. We have a full bar actually. So we carry obviously our own products, but we also carry beer and wine, which is nice that, you know, if a group of people want to come in and one person doesn't drink whiskey, well, there's beer and wine to be had too. So that's certainly a big part of our business, is being that kind of, you know, customer facing element to it. And then, so Saturdays and Sundays, we do private events on other days.
And so as long as it's taken and as much of a struggle as you've had, which isn't bad by a lot of entrepreneurial struggles compared, could you imagine going back and working at the bank?
No, honestly, I mean, I thought about that once in a while. Like if this didn't work out, you know, what would I have done? And, you know, I think what I've realized myself is that up until I went to the bank, I was more concerned to think about, in some ways, image, right? Not that I'm a narcissist, I don't think, but just that, you know, I want to do this job that like is impressive to people. Well, I should do a job because I want to do it, right? So I can think of a million things I'd rather do that pay a lot less, but I'd be a lot happier doing than the bank. Luckily for me, this project has been a passion project and I love it. And it's, knock on wood, looking good. So I think I won't have to make that decision, but no, it wouldn't be sitting at the bank for 80 hours a week. It's just not, again, nothing against it. It's just not for me.
Awesome. Well said. All right. Well, if you're talking to that veteran who just got out or is getting ready to get out, looking to start their own business, they asked you for advice, what comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest thing I think would be, you got to be, well, I don't want to say you got to be all in because I don't want to suggest somebody quit their job like I did. I'd say, understand really what it is you want to do and what you want to get from this. Do you want to make a lot of money? Do you want a lifestyle business? What do you want this to be? That's usually important. And I think understand that honestly, one thing I've learned is that the belt can be tightened quite a bit, you know, and you can look at, you know, if you decide to quit your job and take a risk, it can be scary looking at, you know, that drop in pay, and it is scary. But also, I think that a lot of people don't realize until they're forced to do it, how tight you can bring that belt. How many nights a week you can feed your family beans because it's inexpensive, you know? So, but I think really knowing what it is you want to do and what you want that to be, whether it's lifestyle or something big that you sell to an investor someday or something in between, understanding what it is you want to create, I think, as you start out, at least generally speaking, is very, very important. Awesome.
Well, Mark, thanks for sharing your entrepreneurial success story. We look forward to seeing the future success of Old Line Spirits. And if ever up that way in Baltimore, I have to stop by and check it out. Open on Saturdays and Sundays right now, and maybe more in the future. Sundays right now, and maybe more in the future.